Hi, I'm Professor Joanne Murray and this is my horse Mindy. And in this video I'd like to talk about your horse's gastric health, how we can maintain this and what we can do to help prevent the development of equine gastric ulcer syndrome. But firstly, to fully understand gastric ulcers, it's important to know about the anatomy and physiology of the horse's gastrointestinal tract. The horse has a digestive system that consists of three regions: the stomach, the small intestine and the large intestine. The large intestine is often referred to as the hindgut, and collectively the stomach and the small intestine are termed the foregut. So we often talk about the foregut and the hindgut in horses. The foregut in the horse is similar in function to our own, in that this is where enzymatic digestion of food takes place. The enzymes produced by the horse's body break down proteins, fat, starch and sugars that are then absorbed across the gut wall in the small intestine. Whereas in the hindgut, there are no enzymes. There is no enzymatic digestion, and instead billions of microorganisms break down the food particles that have not been digested in the foregut. And so the digester that reaches the hindgut is predominantly comprised of fibre and some protein. The horse can't digest fibre in the foregut as it doesn't produce any enzymes to break down the fibre present in the feed. And instead, it's the microbes that live in your horse's hindgut that make use of the fibre for themselves to live. And then they produce what's called volatile fatty acids. And these are absorbed across the gut wall in the hindgut and are used as an energy source by the horse. Before we talk about your horse's stomach, which is the focus of this article, it's important to note that digestion begins in the mouth. Your horse has 12 incisor teeth that bite the food, that are selected by the upper lip, and then premolar and molar teeth grind the food to reduce the size of the particles. Your horse has 12 premolar and 12 molar teeth. During the grinding process, the food's also mixed with saliva that's secreted from the salivary glands in response to mastication. It's very important to be aware that in horses, saliva is only produced as a direct response to chewing, which is different to humans and other species. And what this means is that the amount of saliva produced is proportional to the amount of chewing, which in turn is dependent on the physical nature of the feed. So for example, horses chew 4 times as much and produce twice as much saliva production when eating forages compared to concentrates. Mature horses can produce 40 litres of saliva per day, which is why horses need to drink so much water for optimal health. A mature horse at rest in moderate climate will consume between 3 and 7 litres of water per 100 kilogram of body weight, which equates to between 15 and 35 litres for a 500 kilogram horse. Diet also affects water intake, so if they're on a dry food such as hay, they will consume more water compared to if they're eating fresh pasture. Saliva doesn't contain any enzymes in horses, but it plays an important role as a lubricant for the passage of food down the esophagus into the stomach. Another very important function of saliva is it acts as a buffer, which means it helps to maintain a pH of between 6 and 7 in the upper part of the horse's stomach. To better understand what can affect gastric health, it's important to know a little about the anatomy and physiology of your horse's stomach. Firstly, the horse's stomach is relatively small for an animal of its size compared to the rest of its gastrointestinal tract. Think of it of being around the size of a rugby ball. The reason horses are referred to as trickle feeders is that they are designed to eat on an almost continual basis, rather than eating large meals in one go in a way that we're designed to eat as humans. The anatomy of the horse's stomach is also different from some other species in that it's divided into 2 main areas, the top and the bottom. The top part is where the food enters, and this is called the non-glandular region, but can also be referred to as the squamous region due to the squamous lining in this area. This area has a fairly neutral pH of between 5 and 7, and this is maintained by the buffering effects of the saliva. This part has no glands, hence the name non-glandular, and thus does not produce any secretions. The lining of the non-glandular region of the stomach is susceptible to damage if the pH is reduced. The bottom part of the stomach is known as the glandular region because it produces secretions that aid digestion, including hydrochloric acid. Therefore, this part of the horse's stomach is acidic and has a pH of between 1 and 2. But the lining of this area is protected from this low pH by a mucus layer. There are many factors affecting the gastric health of your horse. The area of the stomach that's most susceptible to damage is the non-glandular or the top region. Ulcers can form in this area if a pH of between 6 and 7 is not maintained. And when ulcers form in this part of the stomach, they're often referred to as equine squamous gastric disease. If the pH drops below 4, then this can cause ulceration of the lining of this part of the stomach. And unfortunately, studies have shown that horses are prone to developing ulcers in this region. When ulcers develop in the lower part or the glandular region of the stomach, this is known as equine glandular gastric disease. Therefore, the term equine gastric ulcer syndrome comprises both types of ulcers in the top and the bottom part of the stomach. As I said, there are many factors that can affect the development of ulcers in horses, including a low forage diet, because if your horse isn't chewing enough, then it's not producing enough saliva, and this can then impact on the pH, particularly in the top region. Research has shown that feeding large meals of concentrates that are high in starch is also problematic, because the horse needs to chew this type of feed less compared to forage, plus the feed itself can contribute to a drop in pH. Therefore, horses fed large amounts of concentrates are generally considered at higher risk of developing ulcers. Periods of fasting can also contribute to ulcer development. Studies have shown that horses should not have any less access to forage for more than 3 hours. Again, if horses are not chewing, then they're not producing saliva. Long periods between meals, including forage provision, are undesirable. A lack of turnout to pasture and long periods of stabling are also risk factors for the development of equine gastric ulcer syndrome. Exercise can also contribute to ulcer development, particularly in the top part of the stomach. Research has shown that when horses begin trotting, the pH of the non-glandular region of the stomach drops, and this is seen to be greater when horses were cantered and galloped. This appears to be attributable to what's described as splashing or pushing of the acid contents of the glandular region, which has a lower pH, to the top part of the stomach. The studies have also shown stress to be another potential cause of ulcers. It's thought that tension or tightness in horses may cause a similar effect of pushing that acid up to the top part of the stomach. So it's very important to look at how we can maintain gastric health and help to prevent ulcers. And we need to make sure that our horses have enough access to forage or pasture to provide and support that gut health. And an animal that is designed to eat on an almost continual basis. And if your horse does need to have a restricted diet because it's maybe overweight, then use small hold hay nets, because this can help extend the feeding time and the amount of chewing. Try to avoid starch-based feeds. Feed high quality fibre feeds such as alfalfa and sugar beet pulp, unmolassed. Adding alfalfa to the diet can also help maintain the pH in the upper part of the stomach, because the alfalfa can help buffer the pH and maintain a higher pH. There's also a small amount of evidence that pellets are preferable to short chop forage. The short chop may irritate the lining of the stomach, but more work is needed to research into that. It's also important to make sure that your horse has access to water at all times, and to avoid feeding starch-based meals or feedstuffs that are high in starch. And if you do have to feed starch-based cereal meals, then do so in small meals spread out throughout the day. But certainly try to look at other high-quality fibre sources, or also oil as an alternative energy source. And try to get your horses out in the field as much as possible where practical and where appropriate, as this may help to reduce stress by providing that social contact with other horses. It's also advisable to ensure that your horse's stomach isn't empty before exercise. Again, that's really just to avoid the effects of the splashing or pushing up of acid. So maybe even feeding a small amount of fibre-based pellets 30 minutes before exercise. Lecithin, which is a plant component, has been shown to help maintain gastric health and potentially prevent the development of gastric ulceration by attaching to the lining of the stomach and preventing it from damage by creating a barrier against the acid. Lecithin supplementation has also been reported to reduce excitability and anxiety in horses, which was attributed to its effect on the ulcer healing. Pectin is also a type of fibre found in some plants that forms a gel-like solution at low pH. Therefore, when the pH in the upper part of the stomach is low, then pectin will turn into a gel and bind with the acid, which helps to raise the pH. And studies in horses have shown pectin and lecithin to have a beneficial effect on healing of gastric ulcers. L-arginine is an amino acid that has been repeatedly shown in other species to protect the gastric mucosa from damage, including the development of gastric ulceration. Studies in horses have also demonstrated the role of arginine-derived nitric oxide in accelerating the healing of gastric ulcers, and have shown L-arginine supplementation to support ulcer healing. So in summary, ensure your horse has adequate access to forage or pasture, avoid periods of fasting, feed fibre first and then add on any additional feedstuffs only when required. If feeding high starch concentrates, then do so little and often and avoid large meals. Consider the use of supplements that can help maintain gastric health.